Thanks for choosing this session, Assimilation Retention, as your topic for the Idea Night Roundtable. This is something I've been passionate about for a long time. Let me share a few things with you before we dive into some of the content. In Nelson Searcy's Fusion, he states that 3% of guests will continue to allow you to sustain what your church is averaging right now. We're talking about numerically on a Sunday morning, while 7% actually allows you for some growth. Now, keep in mind with those statistics, before I bore you all night, it's all location-based. For instance, in Las Vegas, we lose about 15% of our congregation just because we're in a transient place, so obviously we need to be assimilating guests at a much higher rate. Either way, I feel like 7%, 7 out of every 100 guests, is a very attainable goal and something easy for us to shoot for. Now, although most churches fall between that 3 and 7% right now, if we want to continue explosive growth, I think there's a few things that we can do in order to really change that 7 to maybe 15, 20, or where we're at currently, which is 35% of guests joining your church. Now, I am going to assume that all of us have a system and a process in mind. Also, I don't want to bore you with how to build a system and process. If you want some of those sessions, we've done some talks on Idea Days in the past, and I'm sure they're coming in the future again. But here, I really want to talk to you about how to bridge the gap from your system to get them into a membership class, to get them into a discipleship class, to get them into something that you would call them member, that you would call them joined, that you would call them discipled. Because that's the goal, right? That's what the Bible tells us in the Great Commission when Jesus himself tells us to go and make disciples for him. So because of that, we've here developed something called the 4-step meeting. It's truly taking our process and putting a person to our process and allowing us to grow. So here's what we want to do. We want to talk to you about what the 4-step meeting is and how it can influence your church. The 4-step meeting is all about finding what step your guest is on. I truly believe there are 3 types of people that come to church. There's the seeker, the person who is truly looking and searching for God. There's the settler, somebody who's brand new to your church, but not brand new to church. Maybe they moved to your city, they're a little newer to the area, and they're just looking for a place to settle. And then there's the skeptic, somebody who's just coming to church because, I don't know, I love a person who loves Jesus, and I love a person who loves your church, so I guess I'll go with them. Or let me find out what this Jesus thing is about, but I'm not really interested that much. So with those 3 people in mind, I think it's important to find out what step they are on. And these 4 steps are as follows: salvation, baptism, church membership, and straight to discipleship. Now, obviously, this depends on what type of guest that person is, but if we can sit down in a meeting location and talk to them about moving along their steps, I believe you'll see explosive growth in your assimilation rates. So how do we do that? Well, one of the first things to realize is that personal connection is powerful. Look, we all may have a process where we send a Starbucks gift card, or maybe we send a letter or whatever have you, but maybe we don't have the personal connection. Maybe we're just sending an email and it's not a personal text message right away, or maybe we're not meeting them at the tent as a pastoral care staff or as a human being at the tent. We're just kind of letting them log in online and fill it out at their discretion. There's no personal connection. There's no person to walk them to the next step. A personal connection is a powerful way to walk somebody into a 4-step meeting. I suggest doing that as the door experience. That's where you get your connection card anyway. You can do that in a church setting. You can invite them to a meet the pastor's dinner. You can do that to a lot of numerous things, but personal interaction with a guest is so important. And in order to do that, we at Southern Hills send a welcome text right away. So the moment somebody walks into our service, they get a personal text from me. It says, "Hey, my name's Blake. I'll be at the service outside, or I'll be at the tent outside after service, and I would love for you to come and meet me." This is an opportunity for me to put a name to a card or a name to a text and really begin working that conversation. Now, as ministers and as fellow laborers in the room, the temptation here is after we get a personal connection going, is to stay in that conversation. What I mean by that is we're so excited that somebody actually responded to our text messages, because we all know that sometimes people just don't. that we begin texting back and forth and we create this massive text string when we're really wanting to point them to the meeting. So my rule, and just a suggestion, is 3 to 5 texts at minimum or at maximum before we begin inviting to a meeting. So, hey, how are you? My name's Blake, and I do something creative like, what was the color of Pastor Josh's shoes today? Or what was this, or what was that, or what was your favorite song we sang? Something that's open-ended that allows a response. And then I end, as the text goes, maybe 2 or 3 texts, I end with, man, I'd love to hear how you can help me help our community. Would you mind if I took you out to a cup of coffee so I could pick your brain? This is imperative in inviting somebody to a meeting because it allows us to really allow people to do what they love to do best, which is talk about themselves and talk about how they can help. So if we invite them to help us, what we're really doing is we're providing value for them and really bringing back some great value and rapport for us. Now we also have a baseline to start our 4-step meeting when we end up meeting finally at the coffee shop. So now we're at the coffee shop. What do we do? Well, when we walk into the coffee shop, one of the first things is being intentional, being aware. Now, as ministers, I'm assuming that our prayer life is strong. I'm assuming that we've walked into this meeting and that we've spent time with God. I'm assuming that we've already prayed for this person. I'm assuming a lot of things going in. These are very practical and tangible tips on how to communicate with the guest and move them forward. Because as ministers, we can get caught in the weeds sometimes of, man, I'm just worried about this or I'm just worried about that, when really we know that the gospel will conquer those things in their life, and we just need windows and opportunities to be able to present just that. So when we're in the coffee shop and we're waiting, be intentional. Questions over directions. So it's kind of, we can fall into the territory of giving directives immediately and always, but in this conversation, we don't want to give directives, we want to ask questions. Questions produce conversations, and then it will lead us to our one actionable step at the end. Through qualifying and open-ended questions, we can find out what step any 3 of our guests are in and really hone in on what the next step they need to take is. So this is a practical conversation design. I want to suggest 4 steps to a practical conversation design. Number 1, when we're at that coffee shop, when we're in the church offices, and you notice I say coffee shop a lot, I suggest meeting outside of the church. It's a big step to walk into a church. Your guest has already taken that step. You take the step to meet them outside of the church. It's a more comfortable environment. So as we're sitting at a coffee shop or a diner or whatever have you, one of the first things we do is we welcome. We don't just take for granted that they're open and available. We thank them and we welcome them for coming into our space and meeting with them. Something along the lines of, hey, I'm so excited that you decided to meet with me. I can't wait to hear how you can help me help our community. Why don't you tell me why you decided to come to church? This is step number 2. This is the understand step. So welcome and understand. Why did you even come into our doors? Not what brought you. Remember, we're not trying to gain this information. Why did you come into our doors? What was your family looking for? How can you help our church? This is what we're looking for in this, and this is the big piece and the area to where we gather all of this information to be able to present our one actionable step. Now, we allow them to then speak, well, I came to church because this is happening in my marriage, or this friend invited me and I noticed how great their kids were and I want my kids to be great and this is why. And then we begin talking to them about their journey. And we ask, okay, I understand why you came to church, but specifically, what are you looking for? Do you mind if I maybe speak in here a little bit? Can I tell you about this? Can I tell you about that? This leads us into our 3rd step, which is state. Welcome, understand, state. This is your opportunity to give your one directive, your one actionable step. It would look something like this. So, Blake, I hear you come to church because you really wanted your family to get back on pace. I noticed you loved this person's family and you've told me how incredible their children are. We at the church truly believe that strong families build strong churches. But ultimately, to build a strong church, you have to know Jesus. Do you mind if I tell you about Jesus? And this is our opportunity to share with them the gospel. If I then, or the guest then goes, Oh, I already know Jesus. Then we can obviously talk about that a little bit more. Then we dig a little bit deeper. Well, have you taken that next step in baptism? Well, do you belong to a local church or body in membership? And maybe you're sitting there and just a little uninformed. Yeah, I joined your church last week, Pastor. Okay, that's awesome. Well, what does discipleship look like? Let us get you in one of our growth classes. Let us get you into one-on-one discipleship. Let us get you to a person that can continue to really, what we're saying, fulfill the Great Commission in their life. And after we give that singular directive, after we've gathered that information, we appreciate. We close the conversation, we don't information dump, and we allow them to commit and make the decision on their own, appreciate them, and then really wait for our next meeting to come in. And that's really the 4-step meeting. This is really truly what it looks like. There has to be a person to the process. Processes are great, but if there's not personal interaction with the process, those processes are going to fail short. I believe that you can increase your assimilation rate majorly if you would just put a person to your process. And I look forward to seeing your answers in the 5 questions that are coming up at this night's roundtable. Have a good night.